Welcome to the Voice Science Podcast, where we explore the science behind singing and teaching. I'm Josh, the founder of VoiceScience.org. I've been educating singers and teachers for over 13 years. Here, you'll learn how the voice works and discover practical tips to train it more efficiently. In today's episode, we're diving into one of the most exciting and misunderstood vocal techniques, belting. You'll learn what makes belting unique, uncover common myths, and discover practical exercises to build a stronger, healthier belt. By the end of this episode, you'll not only understand the science behind belting, but also have tools to start improving your own technique. Let's dive in. So, what is belting? Belting, at its simplest, is the sound you make when you call across a busy parking lot to someone you know. It's powerful, and it's resonant, and it demands attention. But what does the literature have to say about belting? Well, according to Stephen Purdy in his book Musical Theater Song, which provides a comprehensive course in selection, preparation, and presentation for the modern musical theater performer, belting is primarily associated with female singers who will be specifically asked to sing in a belt or legit style during auditions and as roles and songs demand it. He also notes the ongoing debate around if men belt, as the term was first used to describe non-legit singing for women. I've never been a fan of the debate around if men truly belt, but let's see what the research has to say. Shute and Miller, in their 1993 study, present a slightly different definition of belting. Belting is a manner of loud singing that is characterized by consistent use of chest register, a greater than 50% closed phase of the glottis, in a range in which larynx elevation is necessary to match the first formant with the second harmonic on open, high formant 1 vowels, that is, G4 to D5 in female voices. Okay, so that was a lot of science jargon. Let's break that down real quick. The closed phase, or closed quotient, is the percentage of time that the vocal folds are closed during a cycle. When the vocal folds are closed longer, subglottal air pressure increases, which increases amplitude. As for formants and harmonics, don't let the terms scare you. They're fascinating, and I'll walk you through them step by step in a future episode. Now that we've explored the science behind belting, let's clear up some of the biggest myths surrounding this exciting vocal technique. The first myth about belting is that it requires a massive amount of air. I briefly addressed this in the last episode, where we explored how singing louder or higher often leads people to believe that they need more air. This common belief is not entirely wrong. Increased subglottal air pressure does contribute to vocal intensity, but it's not the whole story. During belting, the vocal folds become short and thick, staying closed for a longer portion of each vibratory cycle. This naturally increases subglottal air pressure, creating intensity without requiring excessive airflow. It's been my experience that singers try to overpressurize and just kind of end up shouting. The best way to avoid this overpressurization is to take a smaller, more controlled breath. This allows the vocal folds to do the work without overwhelming them. The second myth is that you can effectively belt any note. There's still some debate about whether it's technically possible to belt very high or very low notes at reduced intensities, but for practical purposes, belting is most effective within a specific range that tops out around C5 for female singers. That's the C above middle C. Above this point, it is thought that the vocal folds have to lengthen and stiffen to continue rising in pitch. This means belting the exceptionally high notes found in some modern musical theater pieces, like the iconic E-flat 5 in Wicked, is simply not feasible. But don't worry, there are techniques to manage this challenge, and I'll share an exercise shortly to help you manage these extreme notes. The final myth is that belting is inherently dangerous and will destroy your beautiful voice. Okay, so singing at higher intensities carries a greater risk of injury than simply not singing. And while no vocal activity is completely risk-free, with proper technique you can minimize the risk of injury. The reality is that belting without proper technique often just resembles shouting, which can strain the voice and increase your risk of injury. If you're serious about improving your belt, find a teacher experienced in CCM styles who can guide you through safe and effective techniques. Now that we've debunked some of the myths about belting, let's focus on how to train your belt safely and effectively. These exercises are designed to address common challenges and help you build strength, control, and range in your belt. As we've mentioned, one of the most common issues I see with belting is that students take a massive breath beforehand, thinking, of course, it's going to help. In reality, this creates an uncontrollable surge of subglottal air pressure, which is especially challenging for beginners. Instead of taking a breath in, I want you to exhale first before attempting your belt. If it's a particularly long phrase, you might not make it to the end, and that's okay. This exercise is about discovering how little air you actually need to belt. The goal here, again, is to find the minimum amount of air that is required. The second exercise is perfect if you're having trouble finding your belt. I want you to try a bit of imagery. I personally don't use a lot of imagery in my studio, but this one works wonders. Imagine you are in a parking lot and you see your best friend across the lot. They didn't see you, but you have exciting news that you just can't wait to tell them. Breathe out and belt a Bob, or whatever their name happens to be. A quick note. I am specifically not making the aspirate H sound at the start of the word hey. Aspirate onsets make belting much more difficult than a strong glottal onset. Give this a few tries and remember, breathe out first. You'll feel the urge to take a deep breath before belting. Resist it. Trust the process and let the belt happen naturally. The third exercise addresses the need to belt higher pitches. Because a physiological belt is impossible at higher pitches, we need to navigate between two different techniques. For notes at C5 and above, we'll use a thin, brassy twang. This involves a head voice or thin fold configuration that's been significantly brightened by narrowing the pharyngeal walls. Think of a witch's cackle. Add slight pressurization to give it a little more oomph. For notes below C5, we'll move back into a true belt technique. So here's what you're going to do. Practice ascending and descending 5-tone scales that cross the transition note, which in this case is C5. Take it slow and make the transition between brassy twang and belt technique at C5 every time. This allows you to maintain the tonal quality of belting while extending your range safely and effectively. So let's recap. In today's episode, we delved into the science and technique of belting, a powerful and often misunderstood vocal skill. We started by defining belting, both in everyday terms and through the lens of research, breaking down its unique physical and acoustic characteristics. Then we tackled 3 common myths about belting. That belting requires a massive amount of air, which in reality, efficient belting relies on minimal controlled breaths. You can effectively belt any note. Of course, belting has a practical range that typically ends around C5 for female singers, with higher notes requiring alternative techniques. And that belting is inherently dangerous. While belting does carry some risks, proper technique and guidance from an experienced teacher can make it safe and sustainable. And then finally, we explored 3 practical exercises to help you train your belt. Remember, exhale before belting to discover the minimum air required for a strong, controlled belt. Use imagery like calling for a friend across a parking lot to find your natural belt without overthinking it. And we did an exercise to navigate to higher pitches by transitioning between a brassy twang for those notes C5 and above and a true belt below. Belting is a dynamic and expressive technique that demands precision, control, and lots of practice. By understanding the science behind it and incorporating these exercises, you can develop a stronger, healthier belt that extends your vocal range while maintaining tonal quality. Thank you for tuning in to the Voice Science Podcast. I hope today's episode gave you a better understanding of the science behind belting and how to train your voice for strength, control, and range. If you're excited to continue learning, head over to voicescience.org, where you'll find more resources, articles, and exercises to help you on your vocal journey. Next time, we'll be diving into the fascinating concept of phonatory threshold pressure, what it is, why it matters, and how it can help you sing with more ease and efficiency. You won't want to miss it. Until then, take care of your voice and keep singing.